What I'm here to talk to you about today is about Veracode's transformation. So I'm going to come at this from a practitioner point of view. So I'll tell you a little bit more about me at Veracode. Again, I've been here over 10 years. I started as an individual contributor. I was a developer on the platform team that actually, who here is a customer already? Excellent, thank you. And the rest of you, I assume, are prospects. So started as a developer. I moved into engineering management. And now what I do is I talk to our biggest customers about how to roll out successful AppSec programs based on the model that we did. So we were a waterfall shop. We'll get into that a little bit. I built the first DevOps team. I was the first Scrum Master. I built the first microservice team. I built the first DevOps team at Veracode. So what I'm going to tell you about is the journey that I helped Veracode take, and we're going to tell you some practical things about that. So again, my current role is Director of Developer Engagement. We're going to talk about this from, and this was a great tee up this morning from Nancy, people, process, technology, and security. Right? I come at it from all of these angles because mostly what you hear is what technologies you need to plug in. What's important to realize is that there are going to be some fundamental changes in the way you have to organize your teams, the way you have to think about culture. And we'll get into a lot of those. To give you a timeline now, again, Veracode's just over 10 years old. So in 2006 when we were founded, we were using Waterfall. 6 years later, now this is an important point. Who has technologies that have been around for years and things that they're trying to move to DevOps? There's a cost associated with this gap of 6 years, and we'll talk about what that is. Project Purina is a project that I started. This is our dog fooding. So this is Veracode using Veracode. How do we use it? How do we think about using it? So that way I could go to talk to customers and say, here's how you use our integrations because this is what we do. I can give you examples and lessons from that. Microservices a couple years ago in DevOps, we're starting that journey. We have DevOps teams. We're doing that today. So I want to talk to you about that. This is, thank you. This is what it feels like culturally, organizationally. Was a roller coaster. It's constant churn as you move from Waterfall to Agile to DevOps, right? And I want to talk about that from two different aspects. One is management. Who in here is management? Got a couple of managers. So from a management point of view, it's about leading change. A very, very important topic if you are a leader in the organization. And this isn't just leading your team, this is leading your peers as well. Organizationally, we're going to start to break down silos, and we're going to have new specialties that are going to come and report to us, and we'll talk about those challenges, which are really about new skills that you need to learn as a manager. So in addition to leading change, you're going to have to learn how to give people the proper care and feeding. So as a 25-year software developer, I know exactly what a career could look like, right? I've lived with those people. I've been one of those people, so I can give guidance to a person just starting out in their career. Well, now I'm going to start adding in quality. I'm going to add in security. I'm going to add in operations. Those people, they tick to a different clock, right? There are different things that motivate them. There's different ways that they think. And you need to be aware of that and conscious of that. You need to go learn those career paths, because you're going to need to lead them down those tracks. And with those new people come new expectations. I used to come in and say, all right, what are we doing today? How are we shipping the software? Now it's how are we operationalizing it? How does it look in production today? These are new things that you have to experience and learn. Now, from the individual standpoint, a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Sometimes anger, right? Change is loss. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. This is the place organizationally where you're going to start to lose some people. They're not ready to make this kind of a dramatic change. Again, from the same point of view, I'm going to have a new manager that doesn't speak my language, doesn't understand me, doesn't know what makes me tick. And I'm going to have to learn new skills. And Nancy talked about this before. You know, I'm not going to have someone that is an expert in everything. I might not even have an expert on my team. Or I might have one, but certainly as an engineering leader, we know single points of failure are really bad. So we have to start cross-training people and say, hey, You need to understand more about our monitoring. You need to understand more about security, and we'll get into that as well. And with those new things come, again, new expectations. I don't just check in, come and do my coding, and then go home. I have other things that I am now responsible for. From a process point of view, this is what it looks like. So the change happens most in Agile, so in the middle there, right? It was very much revolutionary when we moved from a waterfall model to an Agile model. And it was more evolutionary when we went to DevOps. It's more of the same. And this is the Monty Python theory of dinosaurs. Anyone familiar with it? So dinosaurs are thin on one end, much, much thicker in the middle, and then thin again on the other end. So it's all about that Agile transformation. You're doing more and more of that at the tail end of that when you get to DevOps. In a technology situation, see the guys humping the rocks up the hill. Well, this is really what Waterfall is all about. It's manual, manual, manual. And why is that? The economics of Waterfall, when you are releasing maybe once a year, maybe a couple times a year, if I do something once or twice a year, what is the benefit to me to automate that process? There isn't. The math doesn't work. And you're driving so hard that you're just trying to get through it. So you end up doing things like this, where I do it the same thing every time. I'm doing things manually. Now, as we move into Agile, we're going to start to move more machinery in there and get some more automation. But there's still a lot of people involved. And when you get to DevOps, the extreme, it's automate everything. If you can automate it, you should. Think about the compressed timeline. So from a calendar point of view, in a calendar year, I'm going to release between 1 and 4 times if I'm doing Waterfall. If I'm doing Agile really well, maybe it's 12 to 24 times. If I'm doing DevOps, it's 100 plus a year. You can't possibly do that reliably if you don't have this kind of automation for you. So again, as you're moving farther to the right, it's more and more automation. So let's start at the beginning of Veracode. We were Waterfall. Who's done Waterfall before? Probably the people in the back of the room going, oh, God, I remember this. Process. Oh, my God, the process is so heavy. And it's all about doing everything that you can in each of those silos. So we start with all of the requirements. So if we're releasing a product once a year or twice a year, I need to know every single thing that I need to release in 6 to 9 to 12 months now in full detail. Who can do that? We were never able to do that. And one of the problems with this is we generate a ton of work, a ton of paper. I think this is why we have global warming, because of this technology evolution. And anything that you miss farther upstream causes this churn of change, right? We keep going back up the stack and restarting. So if you miss something all the way down in testing, you're like, oh, crap, I forgot something. Traveling all the way back up to requirements, or maybe to design, or maybe to coding. Those are very, very expensive changes and steps to make. From an organizational standpoint, and Nancy touched on this morning, silos. Silos everywhere. The way organizations were built, I had a manager for architecture, I had a manager for development, I had a manager for QA, right? So we had those silos, and we had siloed Waterfall. So each stage was one of those departments, and then they would just chuck stuff over the wall to the next people, right? Not my problem anymore. Here you go. Good luck. Hope it works. Usually what happens, though, it turns into a train wreck, okay? It never really worked the way we wanted it to. Technology, very old school. We'd start with something that they ran the space program on, Gantt charts. Now, if you've never been responsible for this, if you think about, for a company that I was with, we would release every year, you would spend weeks to a month building out a schedule. Who can do what? When can they do it? Can we do things in parallel? You would think through the whole process of what happens over a year, and you have to account for everything. Who's going on vacation? Who's having a baby? You know, who's going to be sick? And that's where the thing starts to fall apart, because you spend all this time building the schedule, and in the first month, something unexpected happens, and the schedule's out the window. And again, this text documents, these requirements documents, these design documents, they would be dozens, if not hundreds of pages long with all of the detail that you needed to do the thing. And you would get updates to these. So I'd get a 50-page doc one day and a 75-page doc the next. And did they tell you what was changed? Was it all isolated? No, it was all mixed in there because they would change language here and change language there. They expected you to read the whole thing all over again, and no one did it. Manual everything, manual testing, manual deployments, manual updates to our databases. It's manual, which is a really, really tough problem to have because it means people are doing it, right, which A, takes more time and has more errors in it. Oh, I forgot to do this. I forgot to do that. If you think about infrastructure from the time that you're doing your development to test to staging to production, each of those phases has a different set of hardware that you're going to go deploy to. And they're not quite the same. They're the same-ish. So there's little differences that you need to account for along the way. So what you deploy in your test environment is radically different than what you're going to need to do sometimes in your production environment. So you're adding steps along the way. So what are you really testing? Right? What are you really testing when you're trying to deploy these? Security, very much the same thing. It happens in about the same time typically as your testing cycle, right? It's at the end. And again, manual, lots of places, pen testing, code analysis or code reviews. And the really bad thing is it's an unpredictable amount of work. Because people aren't used to writing secure code, they have no idea what they're going to put into the code that's going to break at the end here. So remember that Gantt chart that I'm trying to lay out the entire schedule for my project? I don't know how big a blob this thing is. I have to guess. And it's always bigger than you expect it to be. So we move to Agile. And one of the things that we want to do with Agile is start combining responsibilities so people are thinking harder about these problems. Who here has done Agile? Who here is unfamiliar with Agile? So briefly, we start with a backlog. This is the list of things that the product owner, this is a responsibility of the Scrum team, wants you to do. It's a list of everything he knows of right now, and he will add to that list, or she will add to that list over time. So it's not a final list. This isn't like Waterfall, where I have to know everything up front. It's like, here are the most important things. I know exactly what those are. Now, your team will take those in, and by the way, these are prioritized, right? So here's number one, here's number two. Team will go into what's called a planning session or a grooming session, look at these things, they're called stories, say, do I understand this work to the degree to which I can give you a reasonable guess at how long it's going to take me to build? Okay? And until you get to the answer of, yes, I understand, you keep going in this grooming process. We keep breaking the story down and getting more requirements in there. Then you go into what's called a sprint, and this is a period of time under which you're going to work and operate. So typically it's 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks. The team is going to say, well, how much work can we do in 2 weeks? And they're going to say, all right, we're going to take the first 10 things off this list, and we're going to commit as a team to do those things. And this is one of the important things. We're not talking about silos where development says, hey, I'm done, here you go. It's now going to be Dev and QA typically that are going to do this and say, we can commit to getting this work done. And we're going to stand up every single day with each other and track our progress. It's 10 or 15 minutes. It's called a stand-up. And we're going to talk about what we did yesterday, what we're doing today. Is there anything that's blocking us, right? So as a team, we're watching this. And we're going to track it, sometimes visually, but at least electronically. And then at the end of that sprint, we're going to get back together and say, did we get everything done? Because that's really what we want to do. So we do what's called swarming. So if you're in the stand-up and say, hey, I finished all the tasks I'm going to do, typically people are going to go pull something else, another piece of work off. But what really happens in Scrum meetings, if you're doing Agile very well, I can help you. So if someone is behind in their work because of some unexpected thing, I'm going to jump in and help you. So we swarm with each other to get the work that we committed to done. We don't take in new work. And then we talk about it in what's called a retrospective. What went well, what didn't go well, how are we going to change to get better? This is going to be the basis of DevOps. So I'm going to spend a lot of time in Agile world because this is typically how you would do DevOps methodology. And not for Veracode, but usually, here's the security people, right? The outside looking in, they're trying to influence this process, and really what they're trying to do is get budget, right? So think of that backlog. It has things in priority order. If I have something that's really important, I have to influence that product owner to get it into the backlog at a place that the team is actually going to do the work, because if it just sits in there and goes to the bottom, it will never get done. So again, organizationally, we're going to start to break that first silo. So it's not going to be development and quality. It's going to be dev and QA in the same team. So I need to think as a developer about the quality of my software, because it's part of what we need to do as a team to be done. So this is what's called the definition of done, another Agile term, right? So when I pick up a piece of work, I say, what are all the things that I need to do and think about to say I am completely done with it? In the Waterfall process, it was like, I'm done coding, that means done to me. Quality says, I'm done testing, that means done to me. And then security would do the same when we pass it down the line, and each would do their part of done. Now we're trying to get it all done. Initially, we were still very manual. Again, remember that 6-year gap? Well, we need to go and automate that stuff eventually. That's a cost that you have to bear. If you want to get faster, you need to be able to do things in a very repeatable way. So we would have lists of tests that we would go through and do. This was a carryover from Waterfall, but it's where we were, right? You need to go through and start saying, all right, which of these things are we going to automate? What's really important? I would draw on a whiteboard to management and say, here's all the testing I could do, and all the testing I really want to do, and here's what I can afford. It's never all of it. And if you think about pen testing, it's the same problem, right? I can never cover the entire application with a pen test. So I call this the testing Death Star. And to continue on that theme, on push nights. So who's had push night? Yeah, painful. So at Veracode, it was a Thursday night, last Thursday of the month. We would go out to dinner at about 7 o'clock. We'd come back. We would shut the whole platform down at 10 o'clock, and we would do our upgrade, right? And we would hope to be done by 2 a.m. That's the window that we gave ourselves. As you think about a company maturing from the place where we were just static analysis, now we do static and dynamic and pen testing, and we do SCA and all of these other things. Well, the product's getting more and more complex, and not a small team of people working on it. So I need to start asking more and more people to come to push nights. At the max, we were like 25 people. Because if something goes wrong in that window, I don't want to have to wake you up. I want you there. So we were in the building together trying to push this through. One more story. One time we forgot to shut off the backups for the database. So imagine doing, and this was one of the most massive changes we had done to our database schema ever. So the backup's fighting the database and the disk, and our upgrade scripts are fighting the disk. It took us till 5 in the morning to get this done. It was just incredibly painful. But this is what you did. You tried to get it through. The other thing is a lot of late night heroics, push night heroics. So we would be in the room, someone would find something, it's like, oh, crap, oh, I know what to do, and they'd go disappear for 10, 15 minutes, and they'd check in a code change, and then we'd quickly build it, do a little bit of testing on it, and then get it back out into production. Or if it was something in the production environment itself, so the operations people would go in and make the change, or we'd update a database field, or whatever that happened to be, we're doing it at the worst possible time when we're under pressure to be done. But again, that's the world that we lived in. In the early days, from a security point of view, from a static analysis point of view, right? So we've got our backlog here, and our developers are picking up work. And during our sprints, we would go just pick up the next piece of work, etc. And then we'd hit what's called a hardening sprint, or some people call it UAT or what have you, where we're saying, all right, I think we're done. Let's check to see if we're ready to release. So we'd run a build, we'd do our static analysis, and now this really, really terrible thing happens. How many backlogs did you see when I showed you that Agile slide? One. I have one backlog with one set of priorities. Well, I got 2 now. Now I got these security things coming in. What do I do with them? Right? So we have to find a way to merge those. On top of that, if you look between 3 and 4 there, someone sits there, pokes a button. They go to the computer and they go, Okay, Jenkins build. And then what do? Do they go off and do other work? No, they sit and watch the screen fill with text. Can't be long. I mean, a couple minutes. I might as well just sit here. There's nothing really good to do. Same thing when we're configuring our scans, right? I'm going to sit there, wait for it to be done. So I'm wasting people time now, too. This is real cost. So what we did in Project Purina was automate and integrate. In our retrospectives, we kept analyzing and saying, there's still something wrong. We could still be better. What's the next phase? What's the next step? So we actually took some real developers and put them on this problem. So we have an agile backlog. Developers take their work. Now, as Joseph talked about, and Nancy talked about as well, now we're doing static analysis at the time of coding, as far left as possible. When I'm writing that code, sorry, your left is this way. When I'm writing that code, I want to make sure, in the same way that I'm doing my unit tests, that the code is secure. Now, you get a couple of benefits from this, not just secure code in your repository, but now it starts to come out of these securely. So who here is a Java developer in the room? All right, so I got a Java developer back there. If I was to tell Joseph that he's going to switch to C# tomorrow, the problem that he's going to run into, he's going to run into compilation errors. He's not going to understand really the syntax of the language. It's going to take him a while to get there and understand that. And if you think about what a developer does every day, they're saving and compiling constantly, right? Dozens of times a day at least, if not hundreds of times a day. Every small code increment, they're like, okay, let me make sure this compiles. Now, your more experienced developers can do that, and it will always compile. Your least skilled developers are going to have that problem, and they're going to learn over time by that constant repetition. So we think about security the same way. If you can learn at the speed of compile, where I run my static analysis at the time I made that code change, I'm leveraging that same learning cycle that we have with our development teams, right? I'm like, oh yeah, SQL injection. Yeah, I forgot about that. And now the next time I go to write that, maybe it comes out of the fingers securely. Think of the cost savings of not having to track an issue back through the team, fight for budget to get that SQL injection fixed. What if they never wrote it in the first place? That's where the real savings is, and that's why we talk about moving as far left as possible. So I expect my developers to check in clean and secure code. Now, for those of you that are just onboarding or just starting an AppSec program, you might have hundreds, you might have thousands of security vulnerabilities in your code. The bar to set for them is don't check in anything new. We know there's debt there. We call this security debt. We're going to come up with a program to go fix this and go after it. What I want you to do is put the shovel down. Don't make the hole deeper. Don't throw more stuff on the pile. Okay? So it's a great place to start. So now nightly, so this is our big product, Jenkins comes up by itself. Nobody has to do anything. It builds, it runs static analysis, and now I synchronize that to my backlog. You notice I don't have this new input. It goes into what is typically a triaging process. So if your quality people are in there and they're testing the software, they find a problem, they'll put a bug in. If it's a product that's out in the field, the services people or operations might put bugs in for things that customers have seen. Those go into what's called a list of new issues. You triage those every day, and you look at them. So we think about security vulnerabilities the same way we think about any other bug in the system. This isn't the only thing that we do at Veracode, right? It's not limited to just static analysis and automation. Right? So we have this thing called security champions. So this is on every single team. Who has a security practice that's bigger than one person? Okay, how about bigger than 10? Oh, a couple, all right, you guys got good budget. It's hard to buy these people. It's hard to train these people, right? It's hard to stretch them across what is usually at least a 10-to-1 ratio, sometimes 50-to-1, around the number of developers you have, the number of security people, or even the number of teams that you have to the number of security people. So how do you do that? How do you become the eyes and ears? So we train individuals on the teams themselves to be the eyes and ears. Here are the things you need to look for. Here are the things you need to think about, right? So we do that in what's called security grooming. So it's the same thing that we talked about with that backlog where we say, here's the story, do I understand it? Now I look at it from a threat modeling point of view to understand this, to make sure that I know what it's going to take to test this from a security aspect and what things they should worry about. And it's part of the definition of done. Again, remember, that's the list of things I need to do when I pick a piece of work up to say, I am really finished with it. We do threat modeling. That's part of that grooming process. And what that's going to lead to is sometimes static analysis isn't enough, right? I want to do a secure code review. Maybe I want to do some pen testing. Those are things that are going to fall outside of that process. Those are the things that you're going to want to engage your security experts on, not your security champions. So their job is to suss those things out, find them, and hope that they're a small enough part of the budget that you can actually afford to do them. And we also do pre-production dynamic analysis. So culturally, there's a clash here, right? As we're moving to this model of releasing and releasing faster and faster, if you think about that year-long process, an operations person has a ton of time to really understand the product, play with it, get to know it, and figure out what's going on. But in Agile, now you're moving so fast that, hey, it worked when I tested it. I don't know what's going on. And you got a developer, again, that wants to move fast. They want to go to the next big thing. They want to go to the next language or the next framework or the next operating system or what have you. So they're constantly churning, and the operations people are having a hard time keeping up with that. They want it to be stable. Right? They're paid to have stability. They're not paid to move fast. So this is where we get into DevOps. So remember, we talked about the Agile transformation where we combine Dev and QA because we want developers to think about the quality of their software. Well, what if you had a world where the developer had to think about operationalizing their software and monitoring their software and fixing their software when it was out in the field? Would I think differently as a developer if I had to run the software and make sure that it was up and productive for our customers? I think the answer to that is yes. So from a process point of view, this is a continuous process. This works at micro levels. This works at macro levels. So an individual developer picks up a piece of work. They may deploy this into production on that day that they pick it up. It could be weeks. It depends on the organization, but it is a continuous process where I'm responsible for every aspect of the work. And the same thing at the team level. So if we're talking about a Scrum team that's taking on work, they are also responsible, cradle to grave, of these pieces of functionality. From a people perspective, now we're going to really, this is where it gets ugly from an organizational perspective, right? We're breaking down the final silos. We're saying, you know what? Let's think about this differently. Let's not have an operations team, but let's break operations and say, you go with that product, you go with this product, you go with that product. That's typically how they're trained anyways. They're specialists. So we're going to reorganize all of our people and say product specific, not discipline. We need to change the culture. So again, remember these developers. So, you know, you look at a developer that's been doing this for 20 years. Maybe they come in at, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, and they stay there until 8, 9, 10 at night. Now you say, hey, not only are you responsible for this thing that you're doing, but you got to wear a pager. So Saturday, you're going to have a pager on you, and when that thing goes off at 2 in the morning, like it always does, you're going to have to wake up, look at the logs, figure out what's going on, fix it. That is a culture shock. Everyone on that team is now responsible for the development, the quality, the security, the operations of that software. That is a big change. And this is where people start to walk out the door. I'm not ready for this. I'm just a developer. I don't want to get woken up. This is not my life. Eventually, they're going to have to get through that knothole, or that niche will become smaller and smaller of places that they can work. But again, this organizationally is a really hard thing to get through, both managerially and as an individual contributor. From a technology point of view, as I pointed out before, it's all about automation. God, if there's anything that you can do to automate any part of this, do it. Because remember, we're not talking about 1 to 4. We're talking about 100 plus releases a year. If we can't do it and redo it the same every single time, we're dead. We'll never get there. Feature switching. This is very popular at places like Amazon. So I'm sure everyone here uses Amazon. Netflix. any of these really big DevOps shops, they are changing constantly. Sometimes they're going to take a piece of code that's written that maybe isn't even fully complete, and they're going to ship it with the product, but it's going to be turned on by what's called a feature switch, so no one gets to see it. When it's done, they may do the same thing. They don't just turn it on for everybody, because they have millions of users. So if you think maybe I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to turn this on. This is called canary rollout. I'm going to turn it on for these 4 people at this first table. That's it. So I'm going to watch it. I'm going to monitor it. I'm going to look at it and say, hey, is this working okay? If it is, then maybe I put this whole row of tables there on it. And then eventually I can open up to everybody, or I can take it all away if it all looks bad. Zero downtime, this is another one. So when we were a mostly U.S. customer base, shutting down at 10 p.m. and coming back up at 2, not that big a deal. Our customers weren't really automated and integrated with us either. So doing things off hours like that, not a big deal. Now we're a global company. We have customers all around the world that are operating on our platform all the time. You have to change your architecture. You have to think differently about how you operationalize it such that you can move software out while they're still using it. It's changing the engine on the plane while it's in flight. And to make small increments. So it's all about doing things small, trying it out, seeing if it works, doing the next thing. From a security point of view, how does security keep up with this, especially if you're doing code reviews and pen testing? There's no way you can cover 4 releases a day with your security team, right? So this is what we look like to the people that try to come to us. They know there's a gate there, and they hope they can squeak under it. And this is how a security team feels, right? You got this unicorn pooping out all this magic, but no one's thinking about security. How do I clean this mess up? So the way that we think about this is to integrate it and automate it into what's called the CI/CD pipeline. We heard that term this morning. Who knows what it means? All right, a couple people. So let's talk about it again. This is a genericized version. We have our backlog for our Agile team. Developers come in and do work. Again, we're going to test it both from a functional and a non-functional point of view prior to checking in. Now, here's where things get different. If we're doing DevOps and we want to move fast, on every check-in, we're going to build it. We're going to hit this CI/CD pipeline. CI is continuous integration. CD is continuous deployment or continuous delivery. We're going to build it, and in parallel, I'm going to run my unit testing, and I'm going to run my static analysis. If it doesn't pass, I break the build, and we synchronize the backlog and start over again. Sorry, that didn't work. If it does pass, I'm going to move it to a staging environment. Now, this is typically where CI ends. There's a gray area here. These next 2 boxes can sometimes be considered CI, but this is your continuous integration. I build it, deploy it, so people can test it. Now, I could do automated testing, dynamic analysis. I could do some deeper regression testing. And if that passes, to production we go. And this is the CD portion of the CI/CD pipeline, my continuous deployment. If I can build testing that I trust, I can do this lights out. So when we built our first microservice, what I told the team is I want hands off. I don't want anyone to have to touch a keyboard from the time that you check that code in until the time it hits production, which means I have to have a lot of testing. So if you think about that 6-year problem, there's a lot of testing that needs to get done. This is typically done inside of greenfield projects. So developers have to think about that process. The only thing we do manually is a peer code review. We do that on everything. Now, the things that we talked about before about pen testing and code reviews, those would fall out of that process and happen before you check in. But everything, when it's the time it hits there, I want it to go production, hands off. Pervasive security. So let's talk a minute about training. Think about this as e-learning. Think about it as instructor-led stuff. Metadata-driven, this is an important point for me. Wouldn't it be better, instead of saying, hey, Java developer, go take this 4-hour secure Java coding course? Well, great. Maybe there's some good content in there for me, maybe not. But what if I was synchronizing to a backlog inside of my systems, and I could go mine and say, what's the problem that I'm having? What are they struggling with? Oh, it's SQL injection. Fine. Let's buy 20 pizzas. Let's invite them to lunch. Let's do for an hour something specifically on what they're having trouble with, something that's real to them. How much more impactful would that be to your teams? Static analysis, again, as far left as possible. The second they start writing code, as soon as they have something that compiles, we want to start looking at it from a security aspect. We want to start looking at the open source components that they bring in, right? So that SCA category. Dynamic, the second we can put something onto hardware and run it. and introduce RASP when we hit our staging environments. And then security all the way down the bottom there, right? So threat modeling and security grooming, secure code reviews. We want to help them fix what they find. So that middle section, huge section, this is an important point for you guys to think about what does it take to remediate this flaw? What does a mitigation really mean? Developers don't understand what a mitigation is. What's residual risk? I don't get that. This wasn't code that I wrote, so it's a false positive. There is risk in those applications that they don't understand. So this is a good place for you to be. And then at the end, we're doing red team. We're doing manual pen testing in production. So again, this is the journey that Veracode went on. From an innovation standpoint, we think of this as doing this at the micro level. We do our big changes and try them out, our revolutionary changes. And then we eventually migrate that to the whole system. Continuous improvement, we are always dissatisfied with where we are. We always think we can be better. This is the way agile teams tend to think, is how can I be better? The other thing you get with Veracode, because we've done this ourselves, because we do it for our customers with our services, we have a lot of empathy. We've seen customers go through this process. We have done it ourselves. We can come and talk to you about it from the standpoint of practitioners and say, here's what we've seen work and here's what we've seen not work. So we can guide you through that process. Thank you very much for your time.